All right, everybody excited still? Yeah. That's some St. Thomas excitement right there. We are ready for our next competitor, and my name is Matt Loop from Jack 1023, by the way, because I think I totally forgot to introduce myself at the beginning. So happy to be here. I'm from St. Thomas. I live in St. Thomas. I breathe St. Thomas. So we're all set to go for today. You guys all set and ready to go? Let's bring in the judges.
Awesome. And time. Dear friends, I'm so happy that we have a chance to have some coffees together today. The coffee that I'm going to be making today is a Costa Rican coffee from Tarrazú, grown by the Urenia family, Alex and Roger, so father-son combo. And it's a really exciting coffee because they've been experimenting with varietals. So the coffee that we'll be having today is a Villalobos, which is a Typica and Bourbon hybrid, which resulted in a dwarf mutation. So this coffee, I find, is extremely complex in its flavor. And I wanted to learn a lot about how to roast this coffee. So I'll talk a little bit about that later. For our first course, I wanted to start with our milk beverage. And for this, I am going to be using freeze distilled milk, where I remove 25% of the water content in order to enhance sweetness and also to create a very velvety texture in our coffees. I'm going to be using a recipe of 1 part espresso to 3 parts milk. And I'm doing that in order to really accentuate the sweetness of this coffee. Because of the complexity of this coffee, I really wanted to take a chance to use the milk beverage in order to really bring through the sweet and fruity notes. So in this coffee, we're going to find notes of cherry, vanilla ice cream, and a likeness to watermelon candies in the finish. And for our espresso course today, I did want to take a little bit of time to talk about the roasting process. Because this coffee was roasted on a Stronghold S7 Pro, which is a coffee roaster that uses both hot air and uses halogen as a secondary heat source. And this really gave me a great reason to experiment with what I can really achieve with this roaster. One of the things that I learned while roasting this coffee was that halogen had much of a less effect on the roasting curve as the hot air. And I found that was really interesting because I was able to make very large steps using hot air and very small steps using halogen in the roasting process. And what I was able to discover was the fact that by roasting using this technique, I was able to bring forth more complex notes within the coffee than what I had found when I was just roasting while using halogen and not adjusting halogen in between the stages that I was using hot air for. So I found that by having a more precise control over the roasting curve, that the true complexity of this coffee is going through. So if you could please wait a quick moment before trying this one. Take a second to assess the crema. I just want to talk a little bit more about those experiments because it was something that I found was truly interesting. By using these small intermediary steps between those large steps, the rate of rise at which the coffee was increasing in heat was able to be a lot more stable, which meant that transitions between the roasting process were a lot easier to control. And I found that this was a very interesting thing, especially working with such a unique coffee as this one, in order to bring forward notes that were both fruity at the beginning but spicy at the end. So in this coffee, we're going to find tasting notes of dark cherry, plum, a grapefruit acidity, and a crisp anise seed finish. If you wouldn't mind grabbing your spoons and stirring back and forth 11 times before taking your first sip, please enjoy. And for our final course today, I really wanted to play around once again with the complexity that I found within this coffee. And I wanted to create a drink that sharply contrasted the beverage that we had in our first course. So instead of playing up that nice, sweet, and fruity drink, I wanted to play around with that anise finish on the end to create a drink that was more inspired by spice than by fruit. And I wanted to do this by specifically using coffee as a spice ingredient to create a warm beverage that didn't actually incorporate any spices except the coffee. Thank you. So what I'm going to be doing for this beverage is I'm actually going to use our espresso and a very simple black tea. And I decided to use black tea in order to release tannins into the beverage, which help to dry out a little bit of the mouthfeel that we're going to have in the coffee and is going to mute the flavors that already exist in the fruit notes of this coffee. So by muting those flavor notes, I allow for more space for the spice note that exists in this coffee to really shine through. And the final ingredient for this drink was something that was actually very challenging to find because I wanted to use something that brought out a level of sweetness without reintroducing that sweet and fruity note. So I experimented with a few different things that had sweetness but didn't accentuate fruit and actually helped that spice note to shine. So what I ended up working with was just a freshly squeezed carrot juice. And I'm using this in order to promote a little bit of earthiness, but also to allow that spice note to linger significantly longer than it did during our espresso course. And finally, I decided to use the AeroPress for a couple of reasons. I wanted to use an AeroPress particularly because it helps me to filter out my tea, first out. It also helps me to dissolve my crema, which will curb back the brightness. Thank you. And finally, it's quick, and I have 3 minutes left. Now, in this final drink, we're going to have tasting notes of gingerbread, beet, and finally, we're going to have a lasting anise and cinnamon finish. Thank you. Thank you guys all so much for having this journey with me today and trying all of these coffees. I hope to see you around. Thanks so much. Time.